Hello guys and welcome to the next part of this chapter. This is just a very brief video where we're going to talk about the 3D cursor. So the reason why I wanted to dedicate a whole video to this little guy right here is because he actually serves a very important function because it's referenced in a lot of like tools that we're going to be using. So the 3D cursor is pretty much just a pointing space that we can define, and it's a sort of custom pointing space that we can define to utilize as a point of reference. We can move things from that point, we can spawn things on that position. Like there's a lot of things that we can do with the 3D cursor. Let me very quickly turn on my screen caps right here. Oh, there we go. Got them. Where are my screen caps? There we go. So by mistake, a lot of people, what they will do is they will press shift and right click, and that pretty much moves our 3D cursor into a different position in X, Y, and Z. And the problem with this is now if we were to create or spawn any new object, let's say I'm gonna like spawn a sphere. If I press shift A and I go mesh and create a UV sphere, the UV sphere is gonna be spawned right there at the 3D cursor, which again might not be that bad, but especially when we're working on objects, we always want to try to keep them symmetrical and on the center of the grid and things like that. So as you can see, it's going to be a little bit difficult to do that when my 3D cursor is not in its place. So the first thing I'm going to teach you is how to reset the 3D cursor back to the world's origin. And it's fairly simple. Just press Shift and S on your keyboard, and we're going to select this option that says Cursor to World Origin. And by doing that, the 3D cursor will go, well, to the world origin. So again, when we create something like a cube, for instance, we're going to be able to just spawn it right there at the center of the world, the 000 location. Now, why is the 3D cursor useful? Well, let's talk about using the 3D cursor as a pivot point. If I were to, let's say, move the pivot or the 3D cursor to this place right here, and I want to rotate this element, when I press R and then C, you can see that the cube rotates on its own axis. Well, up here, we have this option that tells us what is the pivot point that we're using. By default, we are using the bounding box center, which in this case is of course on the center of the cube, but we can actually change this, as you can see, to 3D cursor. So if I grab this 3D cursor, now when I rotate on Z, you're gonna see that we're gonna be rotating from the 3D cursor's position, which again can give us some very interesting results and some very nice controls overall. Now, this changing of the origin is also very important, for instance, if we have multiple objects. So if we have multiple objects right here and I select all of them, and I press RC, you're gonna see that right now we are like rotating from the center of the volume of this like selection. However, if I want to rotate each of them individually, I can change this thing and say individual origins are Z, and as you can see now, we can like rotate each cube individually. So very handy ways, things that we can change here to modify where we're rotating from. And of course, the 3D cursor, as we just saw, it's an important element that we can use. Another reason why the 3D cursor is important is so that we can do something known as snapping. So for instance, if I want to duplicate two cubes, right? And I want to make sure that this corner of this cube is attached to, let's say, this corner of this cube, or like just like connect the two corners of a cube. It's going to be a little bit complicated to use my G and try to like find the exact point and calculate. Well, that's where the 3D cursor again comes into play. The first thing I need to do is I need to select the 3D cursor and attach it to the point that's going to be the new origin of my object. Right now, as you can see, the center of my object is on the very center of the cube. But if I grab my 3D cursor and move the cursor, let's say right there, one of the options I can do is I can go to Object, Set Origin, Origin to 3D cursor. And by doing this, as you can see, the little like orange dot, which is the pivot point, will be there. And if I rotate, the rotation, as you can see, it's going to happen from that specific point. Now, if I want to snap the 3D cursor to a corner of my object, one of the options I can select is this snapping option right here, this little magnet. And on the options, I'm going to select vertex and center. So it's going to snap to the center of the vertex, okay? By doing that, if I again press shift and right click, as you can see, when I move the 3D cursor, it will immediately snap to the closest vertex that it finds. So I'm going to snap it right there to that corner. And then what I can do is I can rotate this on the x-axis with control, and as you can see, oh wait, I missed something. So I'm going to select the object. We're going to go Object, Set Origin, Origin to 3D cursor, and as you can see, the origin is now in that corner. So if I rotate on the x-axis, I'm going to be able to just rotate this perfectly 90 degrees. And then if I move it with G, since we still have the vertex snapping selected, it's going to snap to the closest vertex right there. So see how easy it was to find that specific point thanks to the help that we use from the 3D cursor to reposition our pivot point here on our object. So I know there's like a lot of little tools and things that we just saw. We saw the snapping, we saw the component or the transform position, and we saw how to change the pivot point by going into object, set origin, and changing the origin. If you want to get this origin back to the center because you're going to be doing other things, don't worry, just object, set origin, origin to center of mass or center of massive volume, and both of them are going to work with this, of course, because it's just a cube. And that's it. We got the pivot point back on the center. And if we want to reset the 3D cursor again to the origin, just Shift S and we press cursor to world origin. Another cool thing is, for instance, let's say we want to spawn a box right or a sphere right on top of this box. Well, instead of creating a sphere, saying mesh, UV sphere, and then again trying to find like the exact position right there, let's get rid of the snap. Another thing we could do is select the object, press Shift S, and go to cursor to selected, this option right here. And as you can see, the 3D cursor is going to go to the point, to the origin point of the object. And if we spawn something such as a sphere, the sphere is going to spawn right there. So it's going to be a lot easier to just G and Z to push it up. And we are perfectly sure that this thing is aligned to the center of the cube. So again, the pivot points, the 3D cursor, and the snapping tools over here are going to be an important set of tools that we're going to be using throughout the construction of our main weapon. So that's it for this one. Again, try to practice, just do a couple of exercises or just like create a couple of objects to make sure that you are aware of how this thing works. And once you're happy and understand how the 3D cursor works, then we're ready to move on to our little barrel exercise to close this chapter 0. So yeah, that's it for today. Hang on tight and I'll see you back on the next video.